Hello and welcome to today's webinar on Demystifying eUICC, the next evolution of the SIM card. My name is Jeremy Cowan. I'm Editorial Director and co-founder of IoT Now, and I'm delighted to be your moderator today. Thank you to everyone for joining us today. We have one of our biggest attendances for a while and from right around the world. And that's simply because we've got a great discussion for you, brought to you with Sierra Wireless and backed up by independent analysis from Machina Research. So the first thing to do is to introduce you to our speakers. They are Godfrey Ichua, Principal Analyst at Machina Research, who will speak first. It's always a pleasure to have you here, Godfrey.
Thank you for having me.
And I'm delighted to welcome back a speaker we've enjoyed here before, Staffan Eriksson, who is Director of Product Marketing at Sierra Wireless. It's great to have you back, Staffan.
Thank you. Looking forward to this.
Today we are going to look at embedded universal integrated circuit cards. And since that is such a mouthful, I'm just going to call them eUICCs from now on. This has been dubbed the next evolution of the SIM card because it offers users the ability to change service provider profiles over the air without ever needing to physically change the embedded SIM card. Many of you will already be familiar with the way our webinars work. This webinar is being recorded, and you can access it in 48 hours or less via iot-now.com. But we really want to know what you think. So start sending me your questions right now, and after the presentations, I'll put your questions to our panel. Just click on the questions button and type your query into the window. I'll put as many questions as I can to our speakers, as many as time allows. And of course, any that I don't get to will be passed to our speakers to answer offline, and their replies will be copied to you all. Sierra Wireless's slides will also be made available after the webinar. Finally, if you're having any technical issues with audio or slides, you can also use the question window to get advice from our fantastic unseen tech support team. Now, we have our first audience poll. What I'd like you to do, if you will, please, is click on the A, B, C, or D options which you can see in front of you, whichever is closest to your experience, and then we'll see the results immediately. Those results are, of course, anonymous. And the first poll question we're putting to you today is, at what stage is your IoT deployment? Is it that you are already using connected devices? Do you already have an IoT project underway? Do you plan to start an IoT project in the next 12 months? Or are you doing research and not yet sure about an IoT project? So answer whichever is closest to your experience. At what stage is your IoT deployment? Now, I hope that has given you enough time to give us your answers. So I'm going to press on and let's have a little look. Very interesting. 46% of respondents say that they are already using connected devices. Second highest is the category D. I am doing research, but I'm not yet sure about an IoT project. Then 17.8, nearly 18%, I already have an IoT project underway, and 11%, just under, I plan to start an IoT project in the next 12 months. Godfrey, what's your reaction to that?
I think that's very interesting. What we've been seeing in our own surveys is anywhere from 20% to as high as about nearly half. So this is definitely on the higher end of the spectrum where we see enterprises having actually adopted IoT. So it's generally in line. It's a little bit higher than what we've seen. So I think we have a good audience here of early adopters for IoT.
Yeah, it's very encouraging. Stefan, what's your view?
No, apparently 3/4 of the attendants already have or are close to having their connected devices and projects running. So I think that's really interesting. It's a good audience.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, we want to crack on with the webinar. We all want to hear from our panel. So let's start with Godfrey Chua of Machina Research. And afterwards, Godfrey will hand back to me for our second poll. Godfrey, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Jeremy, and hello, everybody. As Jeremy mentioned, my name is Godfrey Chua. I'm Principal Analyst at Machina Research, and thank you for joining us today. And for everybody calling in from all over the world, it's good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be. Again, thank you for joining us. As Jeremy mentioned, Machina Research is a market research and consultancy company. I encourage you to download a copy of the slide presentation where you can get more information from us. I won't talk too much about who we are. Just a quick note that we are, just like every other research company, I guess I have to start out by sharing with everybody some of our numbers. And as I'm sure everybody has seen there, the numbers around IoT are quite large. So on our side, the number that I'm going to share with you is 24 billion, or 24.4 billion by 2025. That is the projection that we have. But what I want to do today, and just a quick note on that, IoT is, I think, a very hard market to size. And it's very easy to get lost in these numbers. In fact, our market model, I believe, is one of the most comprehensive one that we have out there, and it's built on over 200 different use cases. That is then applied to over 200 countries across the globe. So IoT is a very complex, multifaceted issue, and I think it's really very easy to get lost in these big numbers, and certainly to get lost in the hype. So what I want to do today is actually get beyond these numbers and talk a little bit more about and really focus the conversation on the demand side. As the poll questions earlier noted, we've been doing a lot of survey work for the past couple of years now. And one thing that we found is, adoption is really starting to pick up. As we saw in the poll questions earlier, nearly half of our audience today has actually adopted, as I mentioned. In our own surveys, we are seeing adoption rates trend anywhere between a low side of 1/5 of the enterprise base to as much as nearly half of the enterprise base reporting that they have implemented IoT in one form or another. Of course, what's interesting there, too, is, and we see this in our surveys, too, is when you start asking the question of, do you plan to deploy IoT within the next 6 months, 12 months, or 24 months, those numbers really start to trend up. As we saw in our own polling here today, as much as 75%. In our own surveys, we see those numbers range from 60 to 80%. What tends to be quite interesting is when you ask the question of, do you have no interest in IoT at all? And in fact, those numbers tend to be typically less than 10%, anywhere from that, and more so in the low single-digit levels. The key point there being IoT is here today. There's a significant base of adoption that exists already and tremendous amount of interest going forward. And if you look at the time scale within the next 12 to 18 to 24 months, adoption will have pervaded through the majority of enterprises out there. So I think the next question to ask then is, well, what's driving an adoption of IoT amongst the enterprises? And that's one of the key questions that we explore in our surveys. And here is in one of our latest surveys, and this is quite a nice snapshot for the audience today. We actually just released the results of this survey just last week at our Knowledge Forum. And this here we look at a survey, just a very quick note on the survey base here. It's a U.S.-based survey of well over 400 enterprises across a wide gamut of different industries as well as firm size. And I think what's very interesting here is if you look at the top 3 reasons for the adoption of IoT, clearly we start seeing a bit more sophisticated responses emerge from it. I think the crux of it is that it is about competing better with rival products and services, to expand revenue opportunities as well, comes out number 1. And then what I think is interesting here is if you look further down the list of responses, reducing operational expenses, it's sort of middle of the pack. Now, traditionally, we've seen OPEX and improving KPIs, reducing operational expenses, improving productivity as being how we've sold IoT or M2M solutions to the marketplace. But I think with the increasing awareness and the strategic alignment around IoT and business objectives, that the key drivers that we're seeing today really is about creating new revenue opportunities for the organizations, or that digital transformation, and certainly just simply keeping up with the competition. Now, one thing we always like to emphasize in IoT too is that it's a multifaceted, multi-layered process. And there's many aspects to this, right? So then we ask the questions, well, what are your concerns around this fairly complex transformation process and implementation process around IoT? And here we find, and we found this consistently across our various surveys too, is that there's this common theme of pervading concerns around the implementation of IoT. So in this particular survey, when we ask the enterprises about what are their ongoing concerns about pursuing IoT solutions, it's probably no surprise to the audience that the number 1 answer that comes up is security. Nearly 60% of respondents noted security is one of their topmost concerns. But I also like to highlight the second ranking concern, which is the complexity of the IoT implementation process. And we found this time and time again. In fact, what we found in our surveys is security and complexity sort of being always the 1-2 key concern that enterprises have around the implementation of IoT. When you start sub-segmenting the different respondents, and especially those that have implemented IoT versus those that have not, you may actually find complexity may rise to the top as a concern. But the overall key theme here is that these two, security and complexity, we are consistently finding as some of the most important concerns, and it's fair to term them as some of the key friction points that we're seeing in IoT adoption today. And as I mentioned earlier, it's always important to keep in mind as we start exploring these key concerns and friction points in IoT, that each of these concerns are multifaceted in their own nature as well. So let's take the number 1 concern that enterprises have, security. One thing that we found there, and we continue to explore this more and more, is that there's many aspects of security itself. So we also asked the question to enterprises, what are your top IoT security concerns? And it's really, when we start doing this, it really starts to help us understand what are the underlying aspects, but also just how complicated IoT can become. As you can see here in our latest survey results, data privacy and security is something that a lot of companies are wrestling with. And I think one of the challenges there is that there's still a lot of precedent to be set, still a lot of unknowns in terms of how regulation will evolve, in terms of how data is handled. And certainly there's a lot of the traditional concerns that we've heard about within IoT as well. How do we secure sensors, and how do we secure devices that we're trying to push the cost of those devices down? So you almost have these two counter forces at work, right? You're trying to drive the cost of IoT down, but at the same time, you're trying to implement more robust security around it. So as the devices get cheaper, will they be robust enough to actually allow you to implement good and effective device security around them? So, this really brings us to the key themes that, the key concerns around IoT do persist to this day. And they really revolve around the security and complexity that is inherent in any IoT implementations. These are just a few quotes, anecdotes from enterprises when we talk to them. And I think it really comes down to this notion that what we really need to look at is the technologies and the key partners that will allow us to implement those technologies effectively as we go through that enterprise IoT journey. And just to illustrate this enterprise IoT journey a little bit more is one thing I want the audience to keep in mind is that IoT, as we all know, with our sort of high adoption rate in our audience today, IoT is about complex systems. And this is a very simplified illustration of what an IoT solution may look like, right? And it's very important that as we look through each component within an IoT solution, that in addressing the concern around security, it's a question of certainly securing each and every element within that solution, but also wrapping it around that. So address concerns around device security, network security, platforms, applications. Each of those elements must be individually secured effectively by the latest technologies and the appropriate technologies given the business case, but also this notion of wrapping security around the entire solution. And this is where we think that some of these new networking technologies can really come into play in terms of helping with creating that security wrap around this. Now, as you can already see, with so many elements and sub-elements within an IoT solution, complexity is inherently one of the key problems that we need to face. And certainly as we talk with more enterprises and solution providers out there, the question revolves around how do we simplify these processes? And this is really where our today's discussion and certainly the discussion around accelerating IoT in general comes into play. There's a whole host of technologies certainly emerging that's enabling us to simplify the process with which we implement as well as manage these IoT solutions. And that's where eUICC comes into the conversation as one of those key technology developments that we see coming to the fore in enabling at least one important technology tool that allows us to address this question of complexity and security that enterprises have concerns around their implementation of IoT. Now, just a very quick discussion, and we're going to hear more about this from Stefan's presentation later, so I won't go too much into this, but very quickly, ultimately, eUICC is about simplifying the provisioning of devices out there. Flexible and secure remote provisioning, I think these are some of the key highlights. It's really about operational flexibility and improve operational monitoring and sort of that ability to better build into the devices that you'll be deploying the capabilities for remotely and securely provisioning your devices out there. Now, given these key attributes and the importance that we see in terms of simplifying and securing IoT implementations, we do see eUICC as one of the key technological drivers that's going to help drive the market forward. As a result of that, we do see that, especially certainly in the cellular space, that eUICC will play a very important role in terms of helping drive the growth of IoT cellular additions going forward. In fact, from a relatively small base today, we anticipate that by 2024, just a little under 10 years from now, that there'll be as much as 47% of the gross annual additions of cellular connections will be eUICC enabled, as much as 227 million new connections by 2024. Now, as most folks probably know, and certainly that may have been versed in eUICC, know that much of this is being driven by the automotive industry and really the demand from the automotive industries that incorporate eUICC capabilities into their RFPs. But what we do anticipate is certainly as the market becomes more aware of the technology, and certainly this webinar being part of the goal of accomplishing that, we do anticipate that the composition and the key segments driving the adoption of eUICC will change over time. Without a doubt, the automotive sector, the connected car in particular, will continue to maintain a strong proportion. And in fact, will continue to be the largest proportion of eUICC additions going forward. But we also see the utility segment, smart metering in particular, these cross-border implementations by utilities really demanding eUICC capabilities as another important driver for that. UBI, or usage-based insurance, certainly will stand to benefit from that, and a host of other sectors as well. In sum, a very robust 77% annual growth rate for this industry. Now, just a few quick thoughts to keep in mind. What this all ultimately means I think the key important things to keep in mind here is that IoT is here, competitive pressures, and certainly the search for new revenues and growth is what's driving it. Key concerns continue to persist, and they continue to revolve around the fundamental issues of security and the complexity of IoT. Having said that, there are technologies out there to help address the concerns that enterprises have, and the trick will be is understanding what these technologies are. eUICC is among those portfolio of technologies that we do see as really being able to help to address these concerns and thus can help drive IoT forward. It goes without saying, partners are critical. No one enterprise or entity has a full knowledge base around these solutions and the ability to implement them effectively. So trusted technology and implementation partners, we do believe, will be essential to success in any IoT deployment. And without any further ado, I'd like to hand back to Jeremy.
That's great, Godfrey. Thank you very much. Some really interesting stats to pore over there. Let's go to our second poll, though. And this one is fractionally different in that what we're able to do here is to ask you a multiple choice question where you can answer more than one, give more than one answer. We're trying to find out which business challenges do you have with your IoT deployment. So if you have 2 or 3 different challenges, feel free to check each of the relevant boxes. So those challenges, as we've listed them here, may be IoT deployments have been in the field for many years. So that's dealing with legacy, but it also means that you're up and running. Or that you need global coverage with local pricing. Perhaps you're needing to migrate devices to a next-gen technology. And another option is actively tuning the connection, needing to increase efficiency and lower costs. And the fifth option we've given is you want to be able easily to switch to a secondary provider with better coverage. So there's 5 options. Feel free to tick any or all of those. Which business challenges do you have with your IoT deployment? Let's have a look at the results on that so far. A really strong case for points C and E. Migrate devices to a next generation technology is the biggest concern or the biggest challenge. Closely followed by the need easily to switch to a secondary provider with better coverage, and I suspect that's one of the reasons we may have the pleasure of your company here today. 43% gave the need for a global coverage with local pricing. 32% talked about how they want to be able to actively tune the connection to increase efficiency and lower costs, and a robust 27%, so still more than 1 in 4 IoT deployments have been in the field for many years. Let me start with you, Staffan. Is that in line with your expectations?
Yeah, I think this is what you could expect. For instance, this is one of the challenges. How do you future-proof your solution when you're rolling it out? And also, how do you avoid being locked into a relationship with a connectivity provider, which you may not want to stay with for the entire lifespan of your solution. So this is really interesting, and it's also very relevant for the discussion we're having today.
Yeah, I suspect you'll be coming back to some of those points later. Godfrey, what were your thoughts on this?
Yes, just following on what Stefan said, I think it really speaks to what we see some of the key drivers behind eUICC and sort of what underpins our forecasts around it, right? If you look at the connected car segments, but also the smart metering utility segments, which we see as a key use cases sort of driving the adoption of eUICC, maybe not myself, but most people will own their cars for, a good number of years. in some cases as long as 5 to 10 years. And so folks providing those type of services are really concerned about how, as Stefan points out, how do we future-proof these technologies? And certainly the same case goes for utilities deploying their smart meters. They're looking at 10-year contracts, and it's that question of future-proofing, but also I think point E and sort of the huge response on it, or the significant response on it, really speaks to a lot of the feedback that we get from utilities that say, hey, we don't like the idea of being locked into a 10-year contract. We'd like to be able to renegotiate our contracts every 2 years, and obviously. Again, these are folks looking at long time scales in terms of in terms of the way that their solutions are deployed out to their customers. But then it's a question of, well, we want to future-proof it, but we also want a flexibility to know that we're optimizing our OPEX costs and our various cost dynamics as we're actually utilizing those solutions. So yes, I think it really speaks to what's going on.
Well, thank you for that, Godfrey. Stefan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you, Godfrey. Very interesting research there. And as we all could see there is definitely a lot of expectation from the market in the growth of the eUICC. In 3 to 4 years' time, 20-25% of all cards rolled out will be eUICC. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about what eUICC or eSIM actually is and how it can help our customers through their IoT journey and to enable the digitalization of their products and services. But first, a couple of words on Sierra Wireless. The Sierra Wireless, I assume you're all familiar with us as a company, but just a couple of words. We are today the #1 provider of cellular embedded devices. We're providing 1/3 of all worldwide. We have shipped more than 20 million devices today. We've been in the wireless space for more than 20 years, providing M2M and IoT solutions and products to customers all over the world, and always leading in the technology innovation, now focusing a lot on the next generation of products for LTE and IoT. So we offer a portfolio of modules and gateways, but also open source platforms to go with these. But in addition to the hardware, we also provide connectivity and cloud to device services or device cloud services. We have actually been providing cloud and connectivity services for a couple of years now. Not only hardware. And we have customers, more than 1,000 customers on our platform, and more than 2 million subscribers using our services for connectivity and cloud services. And we work all segments and all verticals within the IoT and M2M business. And we work with small companies, enterprises, all the way up to large global OEMs enterprises. So we're providing devices, and we're providing connectivity. But let's now go to the main character of this show today, the eUICC. I'm going to spend a couple of minutes now on discussing a little bit more about what is the eUICC and what is it not. What is happening right now on the market and has been happening for a couple of years, and why is it happening? And what are the key opportunities that our customers see that are emerging through the eUICC? I will also talk a little bit about the standardizations and the work that's being done by GSMA to enable this new evolution to take place. I will also discuss a little bit about the challenges that we see that you should be aware of when looking into eUICC and how we think that you should address them. So first of all, why are there new SIMs? What is happening and why is it happening? And to give it a historical background, since the birth of the SIM card at the dawn of GSM in the early 90s, the SIM has been the property of the network operators. As a customer, you borrowed the SIM card from the network operator in order to be able to use the services that he provided. But your SIM card would not work with the subscription of anyone else. And if you wanted to change your connectivity provider, you had to change the physical SIM card. Go and buy a new one and get it into your machine. What is happening now with the SIM card of the future is that it's no longer the property of the carrier, it's the property of the customer. The customer decides which operator subscription that should go on the SIM card and can change it to another subscription or connectivity provider whenever desired without actually replacing the physical SIM card. So this removes a lot of barriers that exist today for customers or for companies that want to open up new business models and finding new ways of connecting and managing their products and services. And this happens both within the IoT M2M business, but also in the consumer and device area. So this is definitely a benefit to the customers, but it also in the longer perspective will most likely be very beneficial for the carriers. This will open up possibilities for they to expand their business into new areas and grow. So what is driving this change? As already has been mentioned both by Godfrey and Jeremy, this is initially started from the automotive industry, and there's actually been this kind of capabilities out on the market for a couple of years now, but this has been in proprietary solutions. So the auto manufacturers have been strong proponents of this technology as they started to deliver their connected services, their connected vehicles. But they found it very difficult to be successful in this with the existing ecosystem. Another area is, as you're probably familiar with, the handset manufacturers, especially Apple and their Apple SIM. They have been in the same way trying to change the way that customers hook up to operators, carriers. They want to help the customers to select and download and enable their subscription without having to insert a physical SIM card into their iPad or iPhone. So a couple of years ago, GSMA took on the task of trying to address this need in the market and start working toward a standardization of this technology. And that did that through the Embedded SIM initiative. The focus was initially on the automotive manufacturers, the M2M needs, but there is also now a consumer track within the GSMA work. These are at the moment two separate tracks when it comes to the specifications from GSMA, but at some point in the future, it's not unlikely that they will merge into one track. So, what do our customers see? Why are they doing this? What are the kind of opportunities that they see? Because there are additional costs within the eUICC, setting up an eUICC solution from different perspectives, both from the hardware, but also the services and the project. But we have customers who definitely see a clear ROI on adopting this new technology. And we have divided them into three typical categories or use cases. First of all is the what I've already mentioned, the bootstrapping scenario that we call it. This is the global OEMs that are creating global products and global services. And they need to connect their cars locally, but they are not, they do not know where their car or their product will end up when it's being produced. So they need to have one SIM card that goes in every car or every product they're producing, and then it needs to be reprogrammed or configured once they know where the car is going to end up, so that it has the best subscription based on the region or the country where the car is going, how it's going to be used, and maybe also customer preferences. And this cannot be managed with having a pile of SIM cards in the factory, one from each operator. This needs to be managed in another way. The second case is what we call the insurance use case. This was also mentioned by Godfrey as a very typical example is the smart meters being rolled out. That would be out there for a very long time. It could be 10 to 20 years. And there is no feasible way of actually doing a replacement of the SIM card. There could be either that it's the field visits are just too expensive, or the products or the SIM card are hidden and buried deep in the device, so it's no way of getting access to it. And this also means that there is a clear lock-in situation where they have no way of changing carrier. And this, of course, are backdoors. There's no way of really renegotiating the commercial terms. And there's no way of changing carrier if the carrier you're using decides to shut down the technology that you're using. And this is something that might happen if you're looking at the 15, 20-year perspective. Suddenly there is no 2G network anymore. And then you, of course, want to be able to switch to another carrier that stays on that technology. Then the third use case, what we call the active management. That's a more dynamic case where we see the need to do frequently switching of the subscription to optimize the services. It could be to increase the efficiency and the service quality and to lower costs by automatically loading the best subscription at any given situation. And typical use cases for this could be high bandwidth mobile applications, for instance, intercity buses that offer public Wi-Fi to the customers. It could be international transportation companies crossing borders, or it could be employees who use portable devices in their work when they travel. So there is a need to efficiently optimize the connectivity by dynamically activating new subscription based on where the customer is or where the customer, the needs that they have at any given situation. So what is GSMA doing in this? GSMA is the interest group of the more than 800 operators across the world, and they started to address the eSIM, as I said, driven primarily by the automotive industry. And the idea was, of course, to create interoperability. It should align all the key players in this ecosystem, the module manufacturers, the SIM card suppliers, and the operators to create a truly open and interoperable system so that you as a customer should not be dependent on proprietary solutions and locked into one vendor. So the specification puts very detailed requirements on the module suppliers, the SIM card suppliers, and the operators. But it's important to notice also that this is not a formal standard. This is more a recommendation. The formal standards are made by ETSI and 3GPP sometimes in the future. But the GSMA specification has been accepted and adopted by all the key players in the IoT ecosystem and has therefore become a de facto standard. And there's been an evolution of the specifications from GSMA. The first generation was released in 2012. There's been a second generation and a third generation. And the two first generations did not really create the interoperability needed. There were still areas that were not covered by the specifications from GSMA. But the latest version, which was released this summer, 3.1, is the first one that could really provide full interoperability. And we expect to see commercial products on the market towards the end of this year that are supporting this new or latest release. So what is it that they have specified, and what is an eSIM and eUICC? You've probably often heard that term, the eSIM. It's normally more used than eUICC. we like to talk primarily about the eUICC because that's not as ambiguous as the embedded SIM. There's a lot of different interpretations of the embedded SIM and what it means. It means different things to different people. So eUICC is actually not a form factor. It's something that is specified by GSMA, and it could take on any form factor. It could be a mini or a micro or a nano SIM, a normal plastic SIM card, or it could be a solderable SIM card like an MFF2. So embedded does not mean that it has to be something that is hidden and soldered into the product. It could be a normal plug-in SIM card used in a mobile phone. And also, it could be of any kind of quality grade. It could be a normal consumer card, or it could be an automotive card that is meeting all the requirements from the automotive industry. But what an eUICC is, compared to a normal SIM, is that it's actually remotely reprogrammable. It's equipped with a provisioning service that makes it possible to remotely change the subscription and the SIM profile on the card. So this is normally, in layman's term, often called embedded SIM, and that's normally what you see on looking at on the internet, on analysts and so on. But I would say that the two terms, embedded SIM and eUICC, are more or less interchangeable. So the GSMA specified the eUICC, but they also specified the entire ecosystem around the eUICC. It's the processes and the systems and the interfaces for how an eUICC can be remotely managed in a secure and standardized way. And in the end-to-end track, it's about how to download new subscriptions over the air using SMS and IP data channel. And it's about how to integrate to the operators in order to retrieve their subscriptions. So with these processes defined by GSMA, it's possible to download and enable and disable subscriptions on SIM cards. So there could be, on eUICC cards. And basically there's a role, a trusted service manager or service provider that interacts with the card and interacts with the operator to retrieve the new subscription from the operator and perform a download of it and activate it on the eUICC. So going back to what we talked about earlier, what are the key indicators that we see when discussing with our customers? What kind of applications do they primarily consider using eUICC for? And the first one is the one where you have IoT deployments that will be in the field for many years, with the example of smart meters. Installations are difficult to access, and you do not want to be locked into one MNO forever. The second category are the IoT services that are truly global, but where you have to be local in order to be competitive. It could be that you need the local rates in order to be competitive on that market, or it could be that you need to follow local regulations. For instance, on some markets you're not allowed to have permanently roaming, for instance. But you are not able to manage the logistical production nightmare of having a SIM card from every market that you want to address. And the third case is where you actually need this kind of active switching in order to offer the services that your customers are expecting. You need to adapt to their specific needs based on where they are and what they're doing. It might be that you have different needs for different times. Sometimes you're using a lot of data, and then you may need one subscription, and at other times you may be using other or much less data, and then you need to switch to another subscription. So these are the opportunities that we see, but there's also challenges. And although the GSMA have specified and standardized around this, this is still a complex and technically and logistically difficult technology, and it's still very young. This means that there's a lot of different ways to interpret the specifications from GSMA. I think it's around more than 300 pages in the latest release. So there is, with a young technology, it is, and a complex infra or ecosystem with a lot of different vendors, there's definitely a need to do interoperability testing. This is going to be critical for anyone wanting to address this. So you have to put the requirements on the right level from the start, and you have to do thorough interoperability testing. And the way to solve this is either by doing it all yourself, or you find the right partners and you minimize the number of vendors in the solution. The second challenge is around becoming efficient when you actually have implemented the solution. Implementing is one thing, but then having efficient management and operation of the solution is another challenge. How do you optimize your services once it's launched? And we see that there's a lot of different problems here that you could get into. You may, if you're running a multi-vendor strategy with a lot of different suppliers of cards, a lot of different operators and so on, you get into a situation where you will be handling and juggling a lot of platforms, which can be a really challenging from a cost and management perspective to integrate. You also want to make sure that you're not locked into any of the suppliers in the chain. You want to have the freedom to exchange them whenever needed without changing your entire solution. You have to be able to add new partners whenever necessary, and that should not bring to you massive integration projects. And you must have a foundation to continuously evolve and enhance your services and your solution to meet the market demands and the competition. So as we see it, it's really important to simplify and standardize when you're addressing or looking into how to address the eUICC opportunity. So then finally, a couple of words on Sierra Wireless and what we're doing. We are providing an end-to-end device-to-cloud solution. We're providing the modules, we're providing the SIM cards and the connectivity, and we're providing the cloud services. And how does this bring to our customers? If they're looking into eUICC, there you will be able to get one provider of all the key components, pre-integrated and pre-tested. We can provide the modules, the cards of any kind of form factor and quality, and we can provide a management platform. And in addition to that, we can offer the global connectivity subscriptions, providing access to virtually all networks across the globe. And we have the connectivity management as well, so that they can manage their SIM cards, their services, and supervise the quality of their IoT application and services at all times. And the Advantage IoT platform that will be used for the eUICC remote management, provisioning and lifecycle management. It is truly open in that sense that we can manage SIM card and connectivity from Sierra, but it's also possible to administrate third-party MNOs. And this is, of course, extremely important if you're going to, for instance, for the active use case where you need to have a lot of different operators that you manage, and you do not want one platform for each of those. And in addition to that, we have an open platform for device management. We can manage the Sierra devices, modules, and gateways, but also third-party devices. And we have an IoT application enablement functionality that makes it possible to implement your IoT application on our platform or integrate it into your own backend systems. So with that, I'd just like to finish up with letting you know that we are releasing a white paper in 1 week's time. It's going to be emailed out to all of you, and there you can learn more about eUICC in the background and what's going on right now, about remote provisioning and other things that we've discussed today. So I thank you all, and Jeremy, back to you.
Staffan, thank you. That was excellent. We have got so many questions, and there is no way that we're going to be able to get through all of them, even if we had an additional hour. But let's get started and do as many as we can. One questioner has asked, to truly enable global portability of the SIM, do you see the cost of the underlying modem modules paired with the SIMs going up? As he explains, or she explains, they will need to support multiple frequency bands, quad, penta, hexaband devices, and what sort of price point will there be? There's a few questions in there, but it's an interesting question. Staffan?
Yeah, regarding pricing, that's not something that I can cover here, but in general, I would say that this is a new technology, and of course there will be some premium costs to the first versions of these products, but over time, as the volumes grow and the standards are set, I don't see that there's going to be significantly price additions for the eUICC.
Question for someone who said they're not an expert in this area. Can you say a little bit more about what is eUICC and the alternatives and the pros and cons?
Well, that depends very much on what kind of application, what IoT service that they're launching. Looking at the global perspective, there's if you're delivering products across the globe, you might be able to run with a roaming SIM card, for instance, instead of having an eUICC that downloads local subscriptions. But that depends very much on the kind of application you have, and if a roaming card would or a roaming service would meet your requirements, or if you have to have a local subscription.
Yeah. This question was directed to Godfrey, but it may be both of you could answer. Godfrey first. How will eUICC help reduce complexity in IoT deployments?
Well, for one thing, it's sort of that management process that it enables, but also that flexibility, right? Because there's nothing more complex than needing to initiate a bunch of truck rolls or sort of physical access to devices in order to change out your service provider because you decided to go with a different operator. So it's one of those sort of fundamental technologies, and sort of that notion of remote provisioning, the ability to manage and monitor your devices, and sort of the subscription to those devices, I think is the aspect that makes it as one of those things that helps reduce the complexity around an IoT implementation.
Is there anything you want to add on that, Staffan?
No, I think that what we discussed here before, you just look at the automotive and the connected car industry, it's not probably going to be feasible to deploy in the way that they would like it without the eUICC. So I would say it's a must in some cases.
A question from a German questioner. Is it foreseeable that the current eUICC standard, version 3.1, will be supported in the future from subscription managers and service providers when any future standard like 5.0 is in the market?
I think that...
That's
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Stefan. Go ahead. I'll defer to you on that one, Stefan.
Yeah. I think that there's always going to be next versions of standards and specifications. And 3.1 is the first one that we see really interoperable. And I think that that's the way to start. And then you should, of course, adapt new versions when they're coming out. And you should go with partners that ensures that the solution setting up is future-proof and that they will be backward compatible both with existing versions and the future coming versions.
This may be best answered initially by you, Staffan. One questioner would like to understand, will we see new pricing models coming from operators, i.e. eUICC rates against standard SIM rates?
If we're talking about the actual cards, I think I see no reason why there should be that. If we're looking at the services, the subscriptions they're offering, there should be no difference. It's just a question on if it's located on an eUICC card or a SIM card, but there's no reason why the actual service should be priced differently.
Yeah. Any further thoughts on that, Godfrey?
Yeah, just confirming that. I mean, we work quite a bit with service providers across the globe, and in fact, just published a report on it. And this notion of sort of separate or sort of distinct pricing for it hasn't really cropped up. It's very much about being able to respond to the RFPs that are being issued by your customers and sort of having the flexibility to deliver the kind of requirements to their customers that's driving, at least from a service provider standpoint, their interest in adoption of eUICC. So it's very much sort of just a customer demand. Yeah.
This may have to be the last question because we're running out of time, but I'll put this to Staffan, if I may. Staffan, this is a well-known North American telco, a network operator, asking where does the connection manager to change carriers actually reside?
Initially, it's the provider of the eUICC card that has the keys, so to say, to the cards. And that role as a service provider comes with the cards initially, but that can then be transferred. For instance, if you're buying cards from AT&T, AT&T will manage those cards. But if you decide to switch to T-Mobile, you could actually ask T-Mobile to take over the responsibility for doing the future connectivity management or eUICC management of those cards.
Yeah, you've answered that so promptly. I'm going to sneak in one extra question here, and I'll take the consequences later. There's a medical company want to know if Sierra Wireless is working in e-health environments. Staffan, that's for you, please.
Oh yes, definitely. We have customers in all verticals and all industries within and IoT. So yes, we do.
You do. I'm sure that's one that you'd be able to take further offline, and there probably will be plenty more information that you can exchange offline. Gentlemen, thank you very much for answering those questions. I mean, the aim of this webinar throughout has been to demystify eUICCs, not least of all by giving some customer use cases, and you've done that in automotive and UBI and smart metering. And in the panel discussion, we've heard about some of the challenges, both from Godfrey and from Staffan, about IoT complexity and privacy, security, and the fact that, after all, this is still an emerging technology. Sadly, that is all we have time for. We could carry on for longer, and I hope we'll come back to this subject. I feel sure we will. Please remember to bookmark our website at iot-now.com, where you'll find plenty more about embedded UICCs. And you'll also find the latest news, blogs, and videos. And you can stream this webinar from our site sometime in the next 48 hours. Of course, it just remains for me to say a huge thank you to both our speakers. Godfrey Chua of Machina Research. Thank you, Godfrey.
Thank you for having me, Jeremy.
It's been a pleasure. And Staffan Eriksson of Sierra Wireless. Thank you, Staffan.
Thank you, and thank you to all participants.
Yeah, it's been great to have so many here. And most of all, ladies and gentlemen, as we say, we want to thank you for joining us. Keep safe. We really do appreciate the time you've spent with us. From everyone here at IoT Now, enjoy the rest of your day. Bye for now.